The darkest shadow of cruelty isn't the one who lands the blows. It's the stillness of the onlookers. Out in Tombstone, under a sun fierce enough to split the earth, that truth hit like a whip. The saloon doors burst open with a groan that sliced through the midday heat. Out staggered a young woman, no older than 24, her feet bare, her faded green dress ripped to shreds. Bruises marred her skin like dark clouds. She collapsed on the steps, her strength gone, crumpling like a wilted flower. The street went silent, not from care, but from apathy. A couple of cowhands lounged against a post, chewing tobacco, spitting into the dirt, their eyes sliding past her. A shopkeeper's wife, gripping a basket, pulled her son across the road to avoid the scene. Old men on the boardwalk kept puffing their pipes, acting like nothing was amiss. Everyone saw her. No one moved. That's what made it sting deeper. Her name was Lila Rose. Her husband was infamous in Tombstone as a vicious drunk, a man no one liked but no one dared confront. That's how things were back then. What happened behind closed doors was a man's domain, and the town turned a blind eye. Now here she was, sprawled in the open, blood on her cheek, shame in her eyes, and still no hand reached out. But fate has its own rhythm. That same day, Caleb Holt rode into town. At 56, he was a widower, a cattleman who'd lived alone for over a decade since his wife's passing. He came only for nails and grain, simple chores that meant little. He wasn't aiming to be a hero. But as he passed the saloon and saw Lila crumpled on those steps, his boots slowed in the dust. Caleb knew sorrow. He'd buried it with his wife, carried it quietly all these years. Something in the way Lila raised her head, eyes swollen but defiant, struck him like a stray spark. In a town full of folks choosing to look away, he was the only one who paused. And when he did, their stories began to intertwine. Caleb stood there a moment, boots rooted in the dirt, staring at the young woman broken on the steps. The crowd still acted like she was invisible. Maybe that's what pushed him forward. He wasn't one to meddle in others' troubles. For years, he'd kept to his ranch, just him, his herd, and the ghost of a wife taken too soon. Folks in Tombstone called him reserved, some even distant, but solitude sharpens your eye for others' pain. He stretched out a hand. No grand words, just a weathered palm offered in the searing heat. For a heartbeat, Lila hesitated, pride flickering through her bruises. But truth was, she had nowhere else to turn. Slowly, she grasped his hand. That moment felt like a crack of light through the dust and heat. The walk to his cart drew eyes, though no one admitted to watching. A young woman, half limping, half leaning on a man old enough to be her father. Some cowhands sneered, thinking they had the story pegged. A few women muttered, clutching their shawls. But Caleb didn't care, and Lila had no energy left to justify herself. His ranch lay 5 miles north of town, near enough for supplies, far enough to keep trouble at bay. The road was still, just the clop of hooves and the creak of cartwheels. For Lila, every jolt stung, but it was the first pain that carried a hint of freedom. For Caleb, the quiet of that ride felt different from the silence he'd known for years. This quiet held the weight of someone else's trust. When they reached the ranch, he helped her down. The place was plain, worn timber, open fields, nothing fancy, but compared to the saloon's grime, it was a haven. Lila sipped water from a tin cup, her hands shaking so bad it spilled. Caleb didn't chide her, didn't pry, just refilled the cup. Sometimes that's all a shattered spirit needs. Not talk, just a steady presence. For the first time in years, Caleb felt a faint pulse of purpose. For the first time in weeks, Lila felt like tomorrow might be worth seeing. But peace in the frontier is fleeting. Soon, the past she'd fled came charging to Caleb's doorstep. Hey, if this story's hitting you, if it's stirring something about courage and redemption, please hit that subscribe button. It keeps these tales alive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of Lila and Caleb so far? The quiet held for a few days, long enough for Lila to regain a bit of color, her steps growing steadier around the ranch. But the past doesn't let go easy. One sweltering afternoon, it came thundering down the dirt road. Her husband, the man Tombstone knew as a cruel drunk, the one no one ever stood up to, rode up, eyes bloodshot, reeking of cheap whiskey, bellowing her name like she was a lost tool. Lila froze, the bucket slipping from her grip, splashing water across the ground. Fear surged in her eyes, but something else flickered too. A spark of defiance. For the first time, she wasn't alone. He stormed toward her, snarling that she was his to claim. Lila's hands trembled as she reached into the doorway and grabbed Caleb's old hunting knife. She held it out, knuckles pale, her breath uneven. The man laughed, loud and mean, sure she'd crumble like always. He took another step. That's when Caleb stepped out from the shed. He didn't shout, didn't pull a pistol. He just placed himself between them, his broad frame casting a long shadow over her. His voice was low, steady, like a riverbed stone, telling the man she wasn't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. The drunk sneered, spat out a threat, but Caleb didn't budge. Sometimes a man doesn't need fury to make his stand, just the iron in his gaze. The husband cursed, spat into the dirt, and backed off, swearing he'd be back. He'd been the tyrant for so long, but that day, someone finally stood tall. Lila's hand shook as she lowered the knife, her chest heaving like she'd sprinted a mile. Caleb glanced back, not with pity, but with a look that said, "You're safe here." That moment, brief as it was, shifted something. But the fight wasn't over. A man like that doesn't slink away for good. A week later, dust rose on the road again. This time, the husband wasn't alone. Riding beside him was the town marshal, a man who'd known Caleb half his life. Whispers in Tombstone said the drunk had finally dragged the law into his corner. Lila's heart sank as she saw them approach, her grip tightening on the porch rail, bracing for the worst. The husband didn't waste a second, pointing at her, shouting that Caleb had stolen his wife, taken her from her rightful home. His voice cracked with rage, his face flushed from liquor. The marshal dismounted slow, brushing off his coat. He was a man who'd heard too many lies to believe them all. He looked at Caleb, then at Lila, her bruises still fading, her eyes wide with dread. He asked her one question, plain and direct. Did she want to go back? Lila's voice quivered, but it carried clear across the yard. She said no. She said she'd rather die on that porch than live another night under that man's fists. The marshal's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough. Turning to the drunk, his words came out sharp and slow. She chooses where she stays. You've got no hold here. Clear out before you're locked up. The husband sputtered, cursed, tried to push forward, but Caleb stepped off the porch, steady as ever. The marshal's hand rested on his gun, and that was enough. The drunk stumbled back, spitting as he retreated to his horse. It was over in minutes, but for Lila, it felt like the earth had tilted. For the first time, someone with authority had taken her side. For Caleb, it proved standing firm could shift the current, even against a man who'd ruled by fear for years. The sun dipped low as the two men rode off. On that quiet porch, Lila let out a breath she'd held for years, and Caleb gave her a nod that spoke louder than words. If this story's resonating, if it's reminding you of the power of standing up and starting over, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and please subscribe to catch the next chapter of this journey. But surviving's only half the tale. Healing, and maybe even love, come slower, in ways you don't always see coming. When the dust settled and the marshal was gone, life on Caleb's ranch began to shift in small, quiet ways. Lila woke to the crow of roosters, not curses. She drew water from the well without flinching at the thought of a blow. She learned the rhythm of tending horses, the patience of planting seeds, and the rare joy of a laugh that didn't feel stolen. Caleb stayed the same steady man he'd always been. He didn't press her with questions or expect thanks. He just gave her room to breathe. Some evenings, he'd leave a pair of worn boots by the door so she wouldn't have to walk barefoot in the damp grass. A small gesture, but it carried more weight than any speech. Seasons turned fast in the frontier, and with them came a slow mending neither expected. Lila found strength she thought she'd lost forever. Caleb, after years of silence and solitude, learned that caring for someone didn't weaken him. It gave him purpose. They never rushed into grand promises or acted like characters in a penny novel. What they built was stronger, born of respect, patience, and shared survival. And maybe that's the heart of this story. Love doesn't always crash in like a tempest. Sometimes it slips in soft, like morning light after a long night. It makes you wonder, how many lives could change if more folks chose to stop, to help, to stand against cruelty? How many Lila Roses are out there, waiting for someone to see them? And how many Calebs, carrying their own quiet grief, might find new meaning if they dared to care? This tale's not just about the frontier. It's about the kind of people we can still be. If it moved you, if it sparked a thought about courage or second chances, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so we can keep these stories alive. Tell me in the comments, what part of Lila and Caleb's journey hit you hardest? The frontier wasn't just dust and guns. It was a place where courage could rewrite a life. Lila Rose, once broken on those saloon steps, found her footing on Caleb's ranch. Each day brought small victories, the weight of a pitchfork in her hands, the warmth of a fire she helped build, the quiet pride of a garden patch that bloomed under her care. Caleb, too, felt the change. His days, once filled with the same old routines, now carried a new rhythm. He'd catch himself watching her as she worked, not with pity, but with a quiet respect for the strength she was reclaiming. Their bond grew not in loud declarations, but in shared moments. Her passing him a tool without being asked, him leaving a patched blanket by her chair on chilly nights. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of survival, tempered by mutual respect. Tombstone's whispers faded, replaced by the steady hum of a life being rebuilt. The townsfolk, once so quick to turn away, began to notice the change. Some even tipped their hats when Caleb rode through, Lila at his side, her head held higher than before. But the story doesn't end with a single standoff. The drunk husband's shadow lingered, a reminder that freedom isn't won in a day. Rumors swirled that he was gathering men, planning to return with more than words. Caleb and Lila knew the peace they'd found was fragile, but they faced it together. She learned to shoot a rifle, her hands steadier with each pull of the trigger. He fortified the ranch, not with walls, but with a resolve that no man would take her back to that life. And in those quiet evenings, as the sun painted the horizon gold, they'd sit on the porch, the silence between them comfortable, now filled with unspoken trust. It wasn't a storybook romance, but it was real. Two souls, battered by life, finding strength in each other. That's the West at its core. Not just a place of hardship, but a canvas for redemption, where the right hand at the right time can change everything. So, what do you think? Does this story of Lila and Caleb remind you of the power of standing up, of second chances? Drop a comment, hit that like button, and if you want more tales like this, subscribe to keep the journey going. Let's keep these stories alive together.